Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. You know, there are days, and then there are other days, and then there are great days, and this happens to be one of those, like great days for me and Positive Talk. We get to talk to a really, really phenomenal man that he's been out and about doing some really cool stuff for a while now, because it takes time to interview 2,500 thought leaders. It takes time to be on the TED Talks 4 different times with 4 different topics. It takes time to write a book about the book of why. It takes time to do all these things, and yet he does, and he travels as many as has in the past, traveled as many as 300 days a year. And now he's only part-time. He's only traveling 100 to 150 days a year. And he's an amazing man. His name is Poirier. I said that right, yes?
You did. I would say you did it better than I could, because I don't do it very well. I say Poirier, but I don't do it very well.
Poirier.
Yeah.
But whichever works for me, it will work. Welcome to the show. And I've been looking forward to talking to you on the air for a while. The Brushwood Media folks, which, by the way, we have over 1 million listeners a month, and they're really going to be happy to listen to this episode in its entirety. So I hope everybody hangs with it, because it really is, you really are an amazing human being. How did you become such an amazing human being? Somebody wants to ask.
Wow. So, that's very humbling and flattering, first and foremost, Kevin. And as far as, well, first of all, I'll say, if I am an amazing human being, then probably the how is a result a lot of my mother. I was born and raised by a single mother. So I was born, I had 2 parents growing up until I was about 9, and my father's still alive, still lives like give or take 15 minutes from any direction of where I am. But I never run into him, never see him. And so my mother pretty much raised me. And so I believe most of the kind of traits and behaviors and everything that were kind of built into me or bred into me ultimately were a result of my mother. So that's probably where it started.
But you have gone and carried it through for most of your adult life. When did this all begin for you? When did you decide that this was your passion and this is what you wanted to do with yourself?
So when I was younger, i.e. like 16, 17, 18, 19, that age, I don't really think I envisioned myself doing what I'm doing now. People always say, what did you want to be when you grow up? And I will say, I always wanted to be a rock star, but I think that pretty much encompasses, what percentage of, especially boys, I'd say a high percentage. So I don't think that makes me unique, but that was the only side of me that's kind of showed a little bit of what I'm doing now. And I did pursue the music thing. I did put CDs out. I did finally go down that path. But as far as when this all started, up until that age, 19, 20, I graduated high school. I didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Hadn't read a full book, cover to cover. Barely graduated, got a 49+1. So I don't think any of this stuff happened that early. What happened for me is I moved across the country, ended up working for a Fortune 500 company in sales. That really started me down the path because it showed me what was possible. I was working for myself as far as I saw. I was, picking up every now and then books by thought leaders. I watched my first sales training ever was a video by Zig Ziglar. And so all those things, I just started getting exposed a little bit to that kind of world. And I kept on selling for years. And then this is really weird how I kind of got into the path I'm in now is I worked on a couple of CDs, recorded them when I was in one part of the country, near where you said earlier, so near Vancouver. And then I moved to the other side of the country, moved back closer to home. And I took another position selling photocopiers, by the way, which is what I did for a living for 10 years. The second stint of 5 years, because both were 5-year stints, I moved across the country. And while very early in my career there, I wrote a stage play that I put in a fringe festival. They call it the Atlantic Fringe Festival. And I wrote this play, and I didn't want to be in it. I wrote it and directed it, hired 5 actors. I didn't really pay them much, but hired 5 actors. And then I stood at the side of the stage watching them until one of the actors sprained his ankle halfway through the play's run. And then I realized I need to write myself parts because he needed extra time for costume changes. I needed to write myself parts, and I did that. And I didn't want to be on stage. I walked out with my back to the audience with a wig on and a Hulk Hogan t-shirt, and I still was covered in sweat. So the poor actor had to stare at me while I'm covered in sweat because I'm so nervous, even though the audience can't see my face. That was my start in this journey. And what happened was I asked one of the actors how I can get better at this. And he said, I don't know if this will help, but I'm going to a stand-up comedy workshop at the university. So I went for this 2-week workshop about stand-up comedy. Third week, we filled the comedy club. We were going to watch people entertain us. And we found out with 5 minutes notice that we were the entertainers. And we had no material. Ultimately, I went up on that stage, performed. I bombed horribly, Kevin, no laughs. Went back up and performed again. Actually, I found out that I didn't turn the mic on to start with. He turned the mic on. I went and told the jokes, bombed again. I say I'm the only comic that's bombed twice in 10 minutes with the same material. And then about a year later, somebody introduced me to this guy named Tony Robbins, introduced me to his work, brought me to his event, said, do you know he's getting paid to do this? And I was like, wait a minute, record scratch. People get paid to do this? And that was the moment. I mean, again, I've dived in a lot right there already halfway through my life, but that was the moment the needle switched on. I started reading personal development books like Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends and Influence People, wrote my first book, started speaking regularly, was introduced to this idea of the self-help world, and the rest, as they say, is history that we can maybe explore further. But that's kind of how this started.
It seems to me, because we talk about this a lot on the show, is that everything in your life pointed to you doing this over the long term, because your sales work and learning how to be in front of people and stuff, all of that played for you to have the impact and to do what you're doing now. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I didn't know it at the time, but I've read some stuff on Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad,
right?
And what I found fascinating, because I did it without planning it, he did it with planning it. So Robert Kiyosaki, what he did, which I thought was fascinating, is he wanted to become wealthy, and he realized he had to get stronger in different areas in his life. One of them being sales, let's say, another one being leadership. So what he did was he dedicated 3 or 4 years to selling photocopiers with Xerox just to learn sales. He didn't want to make money selling. And it was all to do with, I want to learn sales to become better at sales. Then he went into the military, and he was in there for 3 or 4 years because he wanted to learn leadership skills. And so he did that with different areas of his life. What I find interesting is he did that intentionally. I think I did that stuff unintentionally. And so when I was selling photocopiers door to door, I was learning about communication skills. I was learning about behavior. I was learning about looking at people in the eyes, like all the little life skills we need. I think I was learning them as I did that. And then when I went and did stand-up comedy, I was learning, again, how to communicate, but I was learning how to get comfortable on a stage and tell a story in a way that I'm comfortable sharing the story. And when I started playing music, at first it was about the creativity of writing, but eventually what people said they noticed the most about my shows as a musician was they loved the storytelling. So in between the songs, the stories I would tell, they're like, oh, I love your storytelling. You could tell you're a communicator. And so my point to your question is, I think that was all my training to continue to do what I've done since.
And what you're doing now, how would you describe it?
Well, if you asked me that question 6 years ago, I would have said professional speaker. It was so easy then. Life was easy in that way. I could just say, if you asked me to fill out a form and it said, what do you do for a living? I'd say professional speaker. Or I could say entrepreneur or self-employed, but it was easy. Now it's a little tougher. What I kind of say is, now this is very abstract, but I'll explain it better. But I say now I create the waves for other surfers, and you can change waves with, I try to help people get their message out, and you can trade surfers to speakers or experts. So what I feel I do, I say to create waves because I always used to say I was the surfer myself. Look at Corey, he's doing stuff, when I was the speaker with me and a mic. Then now I try to create the waves for 250 other surfers. So what that means is I'm trying to help create a ripple with other speakers and experts and authors. So ultimately what I'm trying to do is get them more stages, get them in front of more people, so that indirectly, ultimately, I'm impacting more people. But I'm doing it because, like Jerry Seinfeld loves comics, which is why he did Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. I love experts. I love speakers. I love authors. And I want to see more good ones out in the world. So I feel what I do is help people get their message out on various platforms in a bigger way.
Correct, because as Corey, you can impact when you're on stage, you can impact so many people. But multiply that times 250.
Right.
And that gives you a whole different level of the ability to impact people and the planet. And some of the people that you've interviewed, including people like Bob Proctor and Cheech and Chong. No, Cheech. What was his name?
Tommy Chong.
Tommy Chong. And I got you are my hero. You've interviewed a lot of people and you've done it. You've gone to where they are. I do virtually everything via Zoom because it's a lot easier than to go hunt down Tommy Chong, as an example, and to sit in a bar and talk with him about what he was doing and stuff. But you get around a lot. How do you make that work? And what are your frequent flyer miles like?
I mean, the bonuses, meaning like whether it's miles or whether it's points on your card or whatever, they're pretty generous. But I always say, but you still have to spend the money to get there. Meaning, like, you have to spend the money to get those. It's almost like people say, well, I can write it off. Yeah, but you're still going to spend more money than the write-off to get the write-off. Like if you get a meal and people say, well, I can write this $100 meal off. Yeah, but you only get 50 back. If you get 50% tax. So people sometimes just say, just write it off. So I will say there are expenses involved in that. But to answer your bigger question there, with our Blue Talks brand, and it's funny how life works out because none of this was intentional or planned. But with our Blue Talks brand, we run live events, 12 at least a year. And because of that, I end up going to other events to kind of be the face of the company and promote us and what have you. So I might end up going to 20 events. Actually, I worked at the numbers the other day, and I think I'll be at, not even cities, like just places on trips. I think I worked it out that I'll be on 36 trips by the end of this year that I've gone on, where it's like a trip is like California for 2 weeks. So I'm not just talking like, going to one place for a day and leaving. And so I'll have gone on a lot of trips this year. Well, what I do, and this is how I do the in-person, is I just try to line it up around our Blue Talks events. So if the Blue Talks event is bringing me into for UCLA for an event there, then I'll either try to get the person to let me interview them on a Blue Talk stage at UCLA, or I'll rent a studio nearby and interview them. Or I was doing, I did some of these interviews for a documentary I was working on. So then in that case, I would fly to, let's say, Toronto and interview Bob Proctor and Sonia Riccati and Emmanuel Jawls, another guy I interviewed on that trip. So I would go like 4 people, I would interview them. And then I would also make a part of a second trip. So I might be going to Texas, let's say, for a conference or an event. And so I have to stop in Toronto anyway, because where I fly, you can't get direct anywhere. So I would stop in Toronto. I would just add in like 4 days, pay for the hotel, and then go do those interviews somewhere on site. So it's been a mixture, but usually I try to arrange it while I'm already traveling. I don't specifically usually fly in for that specific reason.
And I got to tell you, because I traveled for a period of time in sales. I may be the only dead chicken salesman you've ever met, but I would travel around the United States doing what you did. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of downtime when you're traveling like that, when you're doing the interview. But tell me about the company that you're working with, which is called Blue
Talks.
Blue Talks. Tell us about that.
So Blue itself, the name stands for Business Life Universe. So just like TEDx has a 3-letter name, Blue is BLU, Business Life Universe. So Blue without the E. And ultimately, I sat down years ago at a restaurant with a guy in my mastermind group. And he said, what do you think you want to do? And I said, well, people keep asking me how they can speak on a spiritual TEDx stage. And other people keep saying, I wish there was somebody that could help me get video and all the stuff I need to build my career as a speaker. And so I was talking to him and I said, I just been wondering if maybe I could mix the two of them. And at the time I was doing boot camps. So I was doing like boot camps for my speaking business. And so it seemed like a natural, what if I were to create a live event brand? And I describe it as Chicken Soup meets TEDx. But what if I could build this live event brand? And that's kind of where the conversation started. And we sat for 2 hours. And, by the time I left that luncheon, I knew I wanted it to be called Blue Talks. I knew I wanted to stand for Business Life Universe. I knew I wanted it to be a mix between Chicken Soup and TED. I knew I wanted it to be a live event brand. Honestly, it evolved different ways from there. But I knew all those things on day one. But the reason I created it, so the why behind it, or in the hero world, the origin story, was that I actually struggled when I first started to get bookings, to get clients, to get media, to get anything. And I was told if you build it, they would come. And I always say I built it, but nobody even heard the freaking hammer. Like I just kept hammering and nobody listened. And so because of that, I said, if I can create that for other people in the future, that's what I want to be a part of. But honestly, Kevin, I'm a big believer that you don't teach something until you've mastered it. And so I wasn't ready to teach it, even though I said I'll create this down the road. It took me almost 20 years full circle to finally create what I said I was going to create. I did little things on the way to it earlier, but I finally created it with Blue Talks. And it was really, let's create what those people need that they can't seem to get if they want to be taken seriously as an expert and get more clients. And so it's kind of like we created, like Brendan Burchard has the Experts Academy. It's almost like we created the experts space, or like the experts. We have the experts bureau, so that's one aspect of it. But it's like we created this expert launch pad for people, and so that's what Blue Talks is. But on the outside looking in, from a viewer or listener point of view, Blue Talks is a brand just like TEDx. So we have live events where people are at the events. We run our videos of our talks run on YouTube, Connect TV out of Hollywood, Apple, Roku, Amazon, and so on. We have the books, which actually get distributed to places like Walmart and Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. They become bestsellers. We have the podcast. It's on all the podcast platforms. So it's truly, for the listener and viewer, it's a true brand like TED, but then it's also a brand for the expert on the back end to help them as a launching kit.
Because you're right. There are so many people trying to be speakers. There are only so many events. It's difficult
100%.
for people to get heard, especially in the podcasting world with what are there, 250,000, or they tell me there's as many as 750,000, but a lot of them are defunct now, or they've had podcasts fade, but they're still out there and all that. It's hard for someone to get noticed, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting part is that with the noise out there now, it's harder than ever to stand out. I mean, notice if we kind of group that in with standing out from the crowd, I won't call it impossible. I don't know if it'll ever be impossible, but it's as difficult as it's ever been because, well, it's a double-edged coin, right? Because there's more places to stand out. There's more places to broadcast from. There's more places to get your message out. But there's also so many of them that we only have so much time. And you ultimately most people go back to what they already know. So if you only have room for 3 podcasts, you're going to find your 3 and you're going to keep listening to those. Chances are other people with podcasts are going to have a hard time breaking through. Unless you decide to add one in or you let go of one and say, oh, they stopped making shows. How am I going to break through to that person that only listens to 3 and I've already found the 3? So, yeah, I think it's harder than ever. The good news is there's more platforms than ever. But on top of both of those, more than ever, more platforms than ever, and harder than ever, I think it also means that you have to work that much harder to stand out to people as to why you over all the other confusion and noise and everything else they're looking at.
I want to pick your brain when I come back from this break because you and I, my friend, have lots to talk about. And if you are interested in doing a podcast or to become a speaker, Corey is an excellent resource because he's been doing this for a long time. He's talked to some really Bob Proctor. He's on my list. Or he was. because he's passed now. But there's so many. I got an opportunity to talk to Neil Donald Walsh just the other day, so
Amazing.
I really have been fortunate with what I'm doing. But we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Corey more about his media company, which is Blue Talks, and also his TED Talks and everything that he does, and how he keeps all of his energy and all of his buckets were kind of lined up and stuff. It must be really hard. Go to his website, which is CoreyPoirierMedia.com. Find out all about him. He's been seen on Roku, Success. He works at Walmart. No, wait a minute. He doesn't work at Walmart. He's at the front saying, "Hi, welcome to Walmart." No, we'll be. I'm sorry, Corey. We'll be right back.
Don't be sorry.
They have your eyes. They have your ears. They have your smile. Now all they need is a little more of your time. Make a difference in your child's life, because anyone can be a father. It takes time to be a dad.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. I hope that woke you up. If it didn't, I'll play it again. But we're talking with Corey Poirier and Poirier, I should say. And he is now. Are you the head bottle washer and CEO and all that stuff of Blue Talks?
Yeah. Yes. I mean I think that describes it quite well. Like I'm I guess you'd say the founder and CEO, but also I always say at every event I go to, of our events, I always say I'm trying to fire myself every time I get there. As soon as I get there, that's my first goal, is to get fired. And what I mean by that is, yes, I'm a part of every aspect, but I'm trying to build a company that grows beyond and without me, meaning like scalable, something that can operate without me having to be there. And I've learned that's a big journey, but we're closer and closer now. But because of that, I mean, I've done every aspect, I think, of the company. Like I end up being the person that if a speaker last minute can't speak or has to cancel, I'm the one that actually goes on the stage and does that talk. I end up sometimes, if I'm there, Heidi will place me in to do some interviews. I'm the person that for a while when we first started, I was literally the guy in the corner turning the knobs on the sound, turning up the speaker, down the speaker. Now we're a lot more sophisticated than that. But every aspect of it, yes, I have done every aspect of what we do with Blue Talks, and thankfully that's changing. I'm getting further and further away from that.
Well, and this is a real passion project for you, because you're impacting. Well, let me ask you: do you have any idea how many people you've impacted over your life in a positive way?
I honestly don't, because there's both aspects or sides to the word impact. Like there's what I call the invisible impact, which is I'll never know, but what you impact the person, they tell 5 people, like that type of thing. I'll never know that number. I know that if you talk reach, because reach and impact are different things, Kevin. So you could reach 500,000 people today, but only 400 pay attention. So it's hard for me to separate the two of those. If I talk reach, I mean, it's been millions and millions. If you talk reach, because we have one show that's on 22 FM stations that reaches 2 million people. So even just that alone, but I'm not naive enough to say we're impacting every one of those that listens. I'm just saying that's reach. If I look at YouTube, if you combine all the videos that are out there that I've done and TED Talks and everything, it's over 1 million. And so if you talk reach, it's millions. But if you talk impact, that's a different number. And I don't honestly know that number. I mean, I know it's thousands, but I don't know how much beyond that it is.
Well, and that's one of the cool things about what it is that you do, and what I'm trying to do, is that it doesn't matter.
No.
Because what you're doing is you're putting yourself out there in the best way possible to get the best people that you can have, that can have, if they choose to, a positive impact on somebody's life, or they not. It's up to them. But you're giving them the opportunity, and you're giving also these incredible speakers the opportunity to be heard when I got to tell you, it is hard. It would be really hard to do what you do because you're marketing it, you're presenting it, you're doing the booking of it, you're getting all the stuff together. It's there aren't very many people that are that organized, or at least I don't think, that can get all that done. How do you do that?
Well, these days, I mean, like I said, I've done every aspect of it. So I know every aspect of it. Now, I can't say, and here's the key thing, speaking of myself objectively, I can't say whether I've done it well, but I've done every aspect of it, and it hasn't, as the ship hasn't fallen over. However, having said that, now the answer is different. So how do we do that? Well, you surround yourself with good people. And I knew that from day one, starting this brand, but it wasn't logistically, it wasn't set up to surround, that if you only have your first 4 clients, well, you can't also, theoretically, you can't also have 5 staff members and so on and so forth if you don't know if the thing's going to even launch properly. So we've always had, I think, good people, but some of them were more very temporary, even sometimes on purpose. So our first 3 events, actually 2 events, my friend Tiffany organized the events for us and ran them. And that was such a help because I didn't know how, I'd run events, but not like that. And so I didn't know how to logistically run that. She brought in like 5 volunteers that she knew and put it all together. Well, Tiffany's background is she used to be a trainer for Jack Canfield. So she was a part of all these mega events that Jack's team ran. And so our first events, we had Tiffany. Well, it was always intended to be a handoff. Like she owns like 12 companies, her and her husband. Like she never had the time to do this. And so Shelly, my wife, did our third event, which was at Harvard. Well, she had watched what Tiffany did and kind of became her protege. And then we ran a few events where it was me running the events on site. And then eventually, and COVID kind of slowed us all. And then when we finally started coming back out of COVID, we ran into Heidi, who was at one of our events. And she said, I could organize this. And so that's how Heidi became involved. And so, Heidi is indispensable now as far as I can see it. We have a guy named Tyler who films all the videos. Well, when we first started, we went through 4 or 5 different people filming different events. There was no consistency. And so my answer, the bigger question, Kevin, now that how do you organize it all? It's good people. So right now, if I went through the list, and I did an org chart the other day, but I was including everybody from virtual assistants to freelancers to suppliers. And I think we had 21 people that are a part of making Blue Talks happen in a year. But that doesn't include on our boot camp. We usually bring on about 12 to 15 coaches that volunteer their time. But I mean, there's a structure that they can get paid. But basically, there's 15, say, boot camp coaches that come on. Plus, we have 3 VAs that run the event. So conservatively, there's close to 40 people in a year that are involved in everything we end up doing in a year.
How do you get past the chicken and the egg thing, which is, in my world, the getting the right people and then being able to pay them, which when you're small and you're struggling and you're having trouble getting sponsors or whatever it is, you have to still, I mean, these people have to eat. And if they're really good, you want to keep them, right?
Absolutely. And yes, they do definitely have to eat from what I hear. I have to eat, so I'm assuming they do too. Honestly, I mean, the answer I think is start small. And so the starting small is 1 at a time versus, 10 at a time. And I will say the great part about the online world we're in now is you can hire people that, like, you hire, let's say, one person part-time as a virtual assistant. And let's say, I'm just throwing numbers out, but let's say it could be like $8 US an hour for 20 hours, a week, let's say. Maybe you start there. Maybe it's 10 hours a week. And so it's like less than $100 a week. And you start there and just start handing off a few things. And then eventually that becomes a few more things. And then eventually, if you're bringing in revenue because of that person, then you can bring them to full-time. And so I think it's the best way to do it is methodically versus just saying, I'm going to hire people and go bankrupt. I'm going to hire 8 people and pay them all. And then next month, we're all going to be broke, including me. And then everybody goes to the unemployment office and nobody has money anymore. Like, I think you have to do it in a staggered or a methodical way.
And it takes time. It takes time and effort to do it and to find the right people, because sometimes the right people just aren't there. And you've got to find them. And you're right, going virtual assistant who works in a different country, as a matter of fact, that is interested and then has the capabilities of doing what you need them to do, but because of the economic system in their country, it's a lot easier to hire them. I have one myself who is absolutely indispensable to the business at this point. So I pay her more than the going rate because to me she's worth every penny that I'm paying her. And but yeah, I think that's important to build your brand and to build your company that way. So but you're doing such really good work. Did you realize that the people that you are working with and the impact they're having on the audience and stuff, was that your intention, or did that kind of flow out of it, and that's kind of where you ended up? Because I know Blue has a spiritual component to it. So was that part of your message?
So I didn't know the impact it could have. And in fact, I launched it kind of as an answer to the people that were asking me for it. So it was like, let's see how this goes, because people are asking them like, well, there's a need, so let's test it. And my thinking was, let's do one event, and let's play it by ear. That's kind of like how I started. So there was no big, sexy, here's what I'm going to do with Blue Talks. That wasn't that. Then what happened is, the good part that made me realize there was something here is that we planned one event in San Diego, and I went to this closed Facebook group I had of speakers who had signed up for my speaking program. So they had vested with me already. And I said, here's what we're thinking about doing. Here's the event we're thinking of running. Here's the benefits. Here's what we want to do. Who would be interested? And we had 12 spots, and they were gone in 45 minutes. So I was like, okay, this group's only 300 people. That's like a good percentage, right? 5% jumped on right away. And then we added a second day, and then those went right away. And then I noticed that half the people traveling to San Diego were actually from Western Canada in one city. So I'm like, why don't I just do an event there? You know, like, and not meaning like to replace San Diego, but why don't I see if they want to just do an event locally? So we added a second event, and I asked them, and 6 out of 7 said, yeah, I'd love to switch to there and not travel. And so we added a second event in Alberta. And then we went back out to the same group and said, okay, now we have 6 spots again at each place. Anybody interested? And then those spots went in a little over an hour. So by this point, you know, we're at 20 some spots, almost 30. So almost 10% gone. And we've only done it word of mouth and only done 3 posts. So I started realizing what was really possible. And I said, well, I wonder if I could do something like Harvard. Is that possible? Could I run an event at a place like Harvard? And I didn't know the answer. So I reached out, and turns out I could do an event at Harvard. Now, you can't anymore because they've changed their structure. I mean, they might change it back, but right now you can't. So at the time, though, you could. And I went into the same group, and I said, hey, guys, now we're going to do Harvard. And like, people were typing the answers as quick as I was getting the message out. And those 12 spots are gone. And we ended up having 17 people go to that event, which was insanity. And so we ended up having roughly 50 people, let's say roughly, sign up for our first 3 events, whenever I planned for it to be one day event in San Diego.
That is amazing, because you at one point had to be sitting there going, wow, I guess there is a need for this. And people are really excited about doing it. And people like the community of working together to achieve something for the all that perhaps is better than the individual. We're talking with Corey Poirier to something or other. And he does Blue Talks. He's also done TED Talks. Go to his website, CoreyPoiriermedia.com. We need to take our station break for the Brushwood Media, and we'll be right back with more with Corey. Thank you for being here. I really am enjoying this conversation with you, sir.
My pleasure.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. As you gather with family and friends who love and support you, look closer. There are youth right in your community who don't have the home, warmth, and healing you have. So look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. And for 50 years, Covenant House has worked relentlessly to keep them safe and protected. Tonight, 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed. And tomorrow, they will wake up surrounded by love. They get clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In sites across America to help them fulfill the great promise of their lives. So look closer at Covenant House. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. We've got a great guest for you today, and I absolutely must have to ask Corey about some of the interviews that he's done, because I would love to talk to some of these guys that he's, first of all, as an example, how did you wake Tommy Chong up to get him to interview? First of all, and was he stoned at the time? Because that's the shtick that he and Cheech and Chong did for like 40 years.
I don't know if you could tell. Meaning, like, I think he's at the point where I don't know if you would know. He's pretty chill, either way. And so I don't know if you would know. But as far as the interview, I think I shared this with you off air, but I might not have. But that was a big interview for me in the sense that, yes, I was a fan of Cheech and Chong growing up. Yes, I was a part of that whole world. But I was also a mega fan of the 80s music scene and the Sunset Strip in LA. And so that interview that you're referring to was actually done at the Troubadour on the Sunset Strip, which was like a legendary bar from the 60s, 50s-ish.
That's where Elton John got his start.
It is. And Tommy and Cheech used to play there all the time. And They were the only comics. Like, everybody else was a band, but they were comics. And we were talking about the fact that they were, in a lot of ways, more popular at times than all the musicians that were going there. And so it was epic in so many ways. Like, a person that you grew up watching. When I was interviewing him, he ends up pointing up at the wall, and we look at the fact that him and Cheech's picture's up on the wall that was put up there years ago while I'm doing the interview with him. And he's sitting right across from that picture. I thought that was a cool synchronicity. And then, we're sitting inside the bar where there's only like 8 seats. So few people ever get to sit there because it's a venue that has almost no seats, but the bar has like 6 or 8. And so just everything surrounding that interview was fascinating to me. One thing, a little funny side story is whenever we set up the interview, we were meeting him there. And I say I had a producer with me who was doing the filming from Connect TV, actually. And the guy originally is from Edmonton in Canada, and he's Ukrainian, just like Tommy. So it was kind of cool because he lives in LA. Kent is his name, and he's from Edmonton. And so Kent and I were taking an Uber. Well, I called a black car for Tommy to pick him up and take him to the venue. Well, they got there a half hour early. So what that meant is Tommy was going to get there early, and at the Troubadour, they don't open the door. There's no bell to ring. So you're just standing outside waiting till start time. And so that was kind of scary because I got a message. I still got it on my phone probably, and it says, "Please help, Tommy Chong is lost in the alley near the Troubadour. Go there quickly." And he wasn't really lost in the alley. He was trying to go to the back to find the back to see if he could get in the door. But it was just funny because Tommy's lost in the alley. I thought, this is a text I'll never ever get rid of. This will be framed. But so it was a cool experience. And yes, I don't know if he was high or not, and I never asked. But I will tell you this: the plan was, I said, 35, 40 minutes. And after an hour, he was still more than happy to indulge me.
Yeah, that is so cool. That is so cool. And you've interviewed some really people that are on my bucket list, like Deepak Chopra is on my bucket list. How was he? Another amazing interview. Another one that was on my bucket list as well before it happened. And it was a short interview. I will say that some of the interviews I got after I kind of built a bit of a name that I could sort of pitch bigger names. Some of the interviews, the way I ended up getting them is that I committed to them that it would be less than a certain amount of time. So I think Deepak's was, like we said, 20 to 30 minutes max. And I think it was 20. And so I committed to that. I did an interview with Les Brown in his living room, and there wasn't really a time set, but I knew he just came in from a red eye and he wasn't supposed to be traveling. He ended up traveling, and he had to rush back for my interview, and he hadn't slept in a certain amount of time. So I made the interview a half hour.
That was a personal choice. But what I mean is that, and I interviewed Les like 6 more times after that, so I got the longer interview anyway. But yeah, so the interview was great with Deepak and Les, but they were great interviews. But yeah, with the Deepak one, it was great, but it was definitely a short interview, so I had to really be conscious about what are the 5 or 4 questions I want to get out, and what am I okay with not asking because I might not get them asked. So yeah.
And he can talk, that guy. So you ask him a question, you wind him up for 20 minutes. That's pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So to get some of these bigger names, I know that, there's everybody's out there trying to get as big a names as they quote unquote can. I personally take a different viewpoint because I think there are just so many talented people out there that need to be heard, that I'm not as worried about getting a celebrity or a top name guy, because from my perspective, celebrities are just people too, and they just got their opinions about stuff. But if you can find somebody that is genuinely interested in helping people and creating some nonprofit that is really doing some great work and stuff, for me, that's a better place for me to be. What do you think about that? Am I going to get anywhere?
Yeah, I think so. I think that for me personally, I'm kind of the same feeling, and so that might sound strange coming from somebody who maybe has interviewed a lot of big names, and including celebrities. But I will say, for me, there's a bigger behind the scenes picture out of that, and that's that it's not the celebrity side that I'm trying to interview, and it's not the big name side. It's what I'm trying to do is learn how the top 1% got there. So when I say top 1%, Tommy and Cheech were the top 1% of comedy duos.
Yep.
And when I look at Deepak Chopra, he's the top 1% of spirituality and meditation. So I'm not interviewing Deepak because he's Deepak. I'm interviewing because I want to know what he knows that we need to figure out. I hope that makes sense, but I'm literally trying to get inside their mind and figure out, how did you get to the top 1% and how did you stay there?
Exactly. And there are so many thought leaders that, I wish people would stop, like, I don't know, dying, because there are people that I would really like to have interviewed. Fortunately, I got to interview some that I really wanted to, who have since passed away. But I wish that like Wayne Dyer. I would love to interview Wayne Dyer, but now I can't. And at least until I get to the other side. And stuff, because that's where he is now, and so many of them. But are you finding that there are some really cool new thought leaders that are younger that are coming up as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots. I mean, honestly, I think that, well, just put it this way. I'll say, if I look at it like when you think about thought leaders, like I was a big fan of the Wayne Dyers, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar's, insert name here, right? I could continue down the path, like Brian Tracy, Bob Proctor. And at the same time, I can look and say there's a new class now, and there's probably a new class coming up next. But if I look at kind of the new class of those thought leaders, it may be presented a little different, but it's the Gary Vaynerchuks, the Lewis Howes, the Ed Milet's, and it goes down, right? Tim Ferriss from 4 Hour Work Week. It's those guys. And there's lots of ladies as well, like the Rachel Hollises, the Jasmine Star, like, and I could just sort of round them off, but there's lots. Shalane Johnson, who founded Turbo Jam, but now she's an Instagram influencer. There's lots of kind of new kids in town, and I honestly think a lot of those people I just mentioned have actually been doing it a long time already, even though they might seem like younger. Like Gary Vee has been in the game for 10, 15 years now. And so there's probably a new crowd about to come up. I think we're always going to have that. But I will say, because something you mentioned earlier, how do you stand out? Because it's harder and harder to stand out, and because it's harder and harder to be unique, I think we're going to continue to have them. But I think we're going to see less and less of the big name ones that really stand out. And when they do, they're going to be known to smaller and smaller groups of people. I just think it's changing. We're not going to see probably many more times the Zig Ziglars of the world, where like everybody knows them, or they can say they impacted 100 million lives. That stuff's probably less and less.
Well, they were at the forefront of a lot of the stuff that's going on today. It's been my experience, because I've interviewed 2,000 people, in my experience, that a lot of the new thought leaders are all saying the same things in their own unique way, but it's not something that is so radical that it's different, that it's all working within the same kind of framework, because that's what they believe to be reality. And it makes sense, after The Secret and after, so Bob Proctor and so many things like that, the people are coming back with the same things. They're just phrasing it a little bit differently or saying it differently. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it's one of the things that it took me a while to both discover and be okay with is that no matter how much we're doing, we are not making a new wheel. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're giving our own take on it. Maybe we're adding studs to the wheel. Maybe we're adding chains to the wheel, but we're not making a new wheel. And I say this, it was a struggle for me because I was doing some stuff and I'm like, wow, nobody's done this before. And then, so one example is whenever I was struggling for a while, I did this list of all the people I was surrounding myself with and put a positive sign beside the ones adding positive energy, negative beside the negative. And then I did an inventory to figure out why I was struggling. And I realized I was surrounding myself with mostly negative people. Anyway, I did this whole exercise and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool that I came up with this exercise. And I was telling my friend Tiffany this, the one I told you earlier that helped me with my first two events. She goes, oh yeah, Jack Canfield does that all the time at our events. I'm like, what? And I can go down the list. There's like 8 things that I showed her. And she's like, yeah, Jack does that. And then I went to his book, The Success Principles. And sure enough, I found them in the Success Principles. And my point is, I thought I was doing all these original things. It does tell me that Jack and I must have a synergistic way of thinking, because there is a lot of things that he teaches that I ended up teaching without knowing he taught them, but really was. And here's the thing. I was still teaching what Jack teaches, but I was still giving my own take on it. Like when I talked about why I started doing the inventory, it was because I was battling hypochondria and anxiety, and it had went away for a while, and then it was starting to come back. And I recognized that the only difference between the you of today and the you of 5 years' time will be the books that you read and the people that you meet. And I knew I was reading the right books, so it had to be the people. So that's where I came up with that exercise. Well, that story I just told you, Kevin, is different than what Jack would tell. So my take on it's different, and my doing it on a flip chart is different because I never saw Jack do it. But I'm still doing the same thing as Jack. Well, guess what? Jack has a thing called E plus R equals O. And you can see it on the screen here. But I have a coin I made called E plus R equals O based on what Jack teaches, which is event plus response equals outcome, which stands for event happens, like the price of gas goes up. You get to control your response to that, which will dictate an outcome. And so it just reminds me every day, we get to choose how we respond to things. Well, Jack, I heard from Jack, and I was telling everybody, yeah, Jack Canfield's E plus R equals O. And then one time I heard Jack talk about it. He goes, yeah, I got that from my mentor, W. Clement Stone. And then I'm like, okay, so then if I listen to W. Clement Stone, is he going to say, yeah, I got that from my mentor, W, whatever his name is, Waddles, the guy that wrote Wallace Waddles or whatever, that wrote The Science of Getting Rich. So I don't know how far it goes back. So I think it's like the Beatles, right? Made music that we're still using melody and chords that the Beatles used. They didn't create the chords, but we're using stuff that they use to make new songs. We're not doing anything, I don't think, wholly, completely original. Whereas the Beatles probably did some things original because they were so early on. And then you go back to like the 1900s, and there's musicians there that did stuff that nobody ever probably did. And so I think none of us are really creating something brand new, fresh from start, really. We're just giving a new take on it. And so to go back to your question, I think that's what most of the new thought leaders are doing, but I think that's okay. And I think that's what we need, because we need their take on it and their perspective on it to make it new.
I agree with you 100%. In fact, I often say the day of the guru is dead. It's now the day of the individual, and how an individual responds to things is within themselves, looking outward rather than somebody telling them what to believe going inward. So it's a matter of people phrasing things differently for other people who can understand them differently based upon their experience and growing up, so that they can get what they're trying to say. But the message is remarkably the same regardless of who I talk to, which tells me that there is some divinity to it. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else but me, but it does.
It does to me too. I feel like even though, it's a punch to the gut whenever you think this was my thing. I'm teaching this to the world. Nobody else has taught it to the world. And then, oh no, Jack Canfield's doing that. He's done that for 20 years. It's a punch in the gut. But at the same time, Kevin, it's also, okay, I'm doing something right. If somebody like Jack, who has surrounded himself with all the best of the best, who's been on, the shows like the Oprahs, the Larry King Lives, he's studied with Brendan Burchard personally, with Tony Robbins. And if Jack is teaching this thing after all that, and I kind of thought it came up to me because I needed to fix my life, but I kind of came up with this thing that Jack was already teaching. I'm like, well, clearly I'm on the right track. Clearly I'm teaching the right thing. If Jack, after all his work, also believes in this enough to put it in his book and teach it on his stages.
Well, as an example, I want to use your first TED Talk, because your first TED Talk, you used an example of pulling weeds. And I'd never heard that before, put that way. And there's a gardener out there that's going to go, yeah, well, I pull weeds all, and that makes perfect sense to me to use that metaphor for pulling the 5 weeds in order to give yourself a better life. And so that in itself is very important that you phrased it that way. And I'd never heard it phrased that way.
So there's a book called The Magic of Thinking Big. Have you ever heard of that book?
Yes.
So I read it for the first time. I still haven't finished it, but I started reading it and read some of it for the first time last year. And the reason I know it was last year is I was in London. We were doing our event. Actually, I say London. I think we were at Cambridge University, but I was at the hotel and I took the book with me and I started reading it. And I didn't finish it on that trip. And I don't know if I finished it. I don't think I have. Anyway, so that book is, as you said about my first TED Talk, that book was written in the 50s, but I've never read it. And so my TED Talk was years before reading it. Now, he doesn't go into the 5 weeds or anything, but he talks in the book about mind food, which I always talk about feeding our mind. But he talks about mind food, and he said, think of your mind like a beautiful garden, and you need to pull out the weeds that are impacting it negatively, and you need to cull it so that you only have the good left, the non-weeds. So even though it's not the same, he's still at least referenced taking the weeds out of your mind. And so it's not the same. Like if you got a person that listened to both, like read that part of his book and watch my TED Talk, you wouldn't say they're the same, but he did still allude to the idea of let's pull the weeds out of our life.
But you did the TED Talk before you read the book.
Correct. Yes.
So from my way of speaking, and you mentioned the Beatles, Paul McCartney, when he wrote Yesterday, was divinely inspired because he woke up with it in his head. I think that is happening more and more to us all the time. And we're getting downloads, as some people call it, and divinely inspired things that are trying to take our world back from where we are, which is full of hate, division, and fear, and to make it more with divine love, caring, kindness. And so those messages are getting out in all kinds of ways, and it takes more than one messenger. That's why the Day of the Guru is going away, because it takes all of us to raise our voices to do this. Do you think that's true?
I absolutely do. I mean, I like your take on that. Like the Day of the Guru is sort of gone, and yeah, I think it is a thing where we need. I think we need to hear it more times as well than one. And I think the idea of hearing it, they say, for example, if you go to the sales world, they say somebody has to hear a message 7 times before they decide this is the direction I want to go. And I think it's the same type of thing you're talking about, where maybe I have to hear it from Jack Canfield. Then maybe I have to hear it from Rachel Hollis. Then maybe I have to hear it from Gary Vaynerchuk. And then I go, okay, I'm sold. Like, in other words, okay, you convinced me. I think sometimes one person, you're like, yeah, that's a good point, and do nothing with it. So I think hearing it for different people, and not only, so hearing it for different people, yes, I think it's important, and that might be what makes it stick. The other thing, too, though, is let's not forget the fact that the first person I hear from might not be the right messenger for me. So there's a speaker I love named Eric Thomas. He's known as the hip hop preacher, and he's like intense, and he's like in your face, and he's like, you want my grind, you want my life, but you don't want my grind. And he's like in your face, and he talks about he gets up at 2 to get ahead of the next person that's not up until 3, and he's like all in. And I love him, and he's like, when you listen to him, it's like he's just like in your face. Now Heidi on my team, I probably shouldn't speak for her, but I know that's not her jam. She's not like, she doesn't like, I don't think, the like aggressive motivational speaker. And by the way, I normally don't either, but the way Eric Thomas does it, I dig it. And my point is, he could say something that makes me go, yeah, I get it. But Heidi could hear it, and because that's not her sort of jam, she might say, I don't believe that because I don't like them. Like an example could be the grind. Gary Vaynerchuk talks often about the grind, and now he's kind of changed it. Don't do the grind. But at first he was like, do the grind. So always grinding and trying to make it happen. Well, Gary might say grinding, and I might say, no, I don't like that. Like, I think we need breaks and this and that. And somebody else might say a different way, like Eric, don't compete with anybody else, but try to compete with yourself. Like, be a better version of yourself this year. And that might involve you getting up a half hour earlier. So he might say that it might resonate. Gary might say, we need to grind. And I might like, no, we need to take more breaks. We're all working too much and we're all in and we're always on too often. What I'm getting at is I might hear the same message from two people. One might resonate, and that might be the final time that it kicks in and I start doing.
Exactly. And one of the terms that I like to use is grit, because grit is something that you have and you can develop it if you work hard at it. But it's the ability to keep going and then to never say quit, never stop, and do what you're doing. And that's how you're building your company. And you're also at the same time helping a tremendous amount of people. I want to thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation today. It's been great.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
But before we go, I want you to tell our audience anything that you would like them to know, your website, anything at all.
So I'll say the first is, it's just a quote that I've been reminding myself of recently. So I'd like people to, listen and see if it resonates for them. But I think sometimes people think where you start is a stop point. And like, if you didn't have this background or this happened in your life, then you have no chance. And I'm a believer in this truth. I believe that it doesn't matter as much where you start. It's what you do next. So it's not where you end up. It's what you do next. Like, whatever happened to you before, it doesn't matter. It's what you do right now. It's what you do next. So I believe that to be true. And at the same time, we've talked a little bit about my new book, The Enlightened Passenger. So what you can maybe do next if you want is go grab a copy of the book. That's like a very shill promotion for it. But I really believe in this book. It's a short book. It's like a 90-page parable. It took me 2 years to write it. It's based on the 10 things I've learned in all those interviews you referenced. So, some of those insights are literally, what did I learn from Tommy Chong? But it's me condensing what I learned into 10 lessons in a small little book that's a fictional parable. And I believe a lot of what we've talked about today and some of what we didn't, you can get from that little book. So I would leave people with the idea of, it doesn't matter where you start or what's happened to you, it's what you do next. And then period, stop, full stop. And then if it so inspires you, go check out The Enlightened Passenger and see if it might be the book for you. And if it is, and you feel compelled and you decide to grab a copy, reach out and let me know your thoughts.
That sounds great. And again, the name of the book is
The Enlightened Passenger. And can I drop a website as well, Kevin?
Please do. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the website it's pretty easy. It's thisisthebook.com. So again, thisisthebook.com. It's easy to remember. It's an easy site to get to. And right now, depending on when people are listening, if you're listening live right now and you go there, or in the next little bit, I'm not supposed to have still the bonuses up, but they're still on the site. We did a full launch, and usually you take the bonuses off the day the launch is done. And you can choose if I was lazy and didn't take them off, or B, is it that I want more people to get the bonuses, so I've just kind of forgotten about it for a few more days. But right now, if you go there, the bonuses are still available. And then once we finally switch over the site, which might be this Sunday, then there'll still be a bonus or two. There just won't be all 5 bonuses. So if you go there right now and you hear this, there is probably 5 bonuses and a few extras. If you go there after that, you can still get the book there. It'll still send you to your favorite retailer, but it might be less bonuses.
I would love for you to buy the book through him because he makes a little bit more money that way. I do believe. And Corey Poirier, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Will you come back and we can talk about the new book and stuff? I would love to have you back on the show.
Yeah, to be continued. I would love to do that. And
When you have time, because you're a busy dude.
I do what I can, but the answer is yes, absolutely, Kevin. I'd like to come back in the show. And in the near future, once the dust settles on a few other things we're doing, I'd love to chat with you about bringing you onto our show as well, because you've had a great journey that I'd love to share with people too.
I would love to, and it would be great fun for me. So Corey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another, because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin